Well, it's that time of the week again. It's album review time with me, James Bell. I hope you've had a lovely, relaxing weekend and you've refueled yourself for the week ahead. If you haven't, then, oh, never mind. At least you got me and my album review, so I hope that makes you feel better. I think it will, personally. So, what is the album we're looking at today? Well, it's this. It's Level 42. It's their self-titled debut album. And this was released by Polydor in 1981. So, first of all, let's look at the front cover of it. It's very interesting. The first thing you notice about it is this sort of side profile of this maiden. Very fashionable looking maiden. She's got this sort of hat on. It's a very interesting sort of headscarf, isn't it? I'm not quite sure what to describe it. It's like a hat. And it's got these sort of matching trimmings that match in with this earring, a very long earring, and then a flowing dress all the way down. And then you can see that stripe also matches the sand in the background and the blue gradient sky. Sort of sense of serenity, maybe tropical, and also these leaves here gives a sense of something tropical about it, maybe. It's sort of serenity. I really like it, like paradise almost. But it's a very simplistic design, and this maiden was actually used as a sort of symbol for Level 42 in the later years. It was used, the silhouette was used for their next album, The Early Tapes, which was actually recorded before this one. This was their first album, but that one was recorded earlier, but then released after this album. That one was recorded before they signed to Polydor, and then they signed to Polydor in 1981, recorded this album, and then they acquired the master tapes they had done for the Early Tapes album, which they also called Strategy. On the back, quite plain, but again very nice. We've got the same background design in that little square there, and we have the names of the tracks. So on this album we have Turn It On, 43, Why Are You Leaving, Almost There, Heathrow, Love Games, June Tune, and Star Child. And there's not much, there's no lyric sheet or anything. This sleeve is fairly plain, but yeah, it leaves you wanting to know more, and it makes you intrigued to put the record on and see what it sounds like. So Level 42's lineup they were formed in the Isle of Wight, and they consisted of Phil Gold on drums, Boone Gold on guitar, Mark King on bass, and Mike Lindup on keyboards. And they were jamming in the Isle of Wight, and they got noticed by Elite Records. So they signed to them and recorded what was going to be their second album, Strategy, or the Early Tapes. And they got noticed from there by Polydor, and then that's how they produced their debut album. And they got encouraged during the stage to also do vocalists, and they did consider hiring a vocalist, but in the end they decided that Mark King and Mike Lindup would share the responsibility. What's so interesting about Level 42's sound is that it's very bass-driven and very influenced by jazz and funk from the 70s, and they later on did go towards more of a mainstream pop sound, but I personally really like the early jazz funk sound that they had. And they weren't shy from doing pure instrumentals, long instrumentals on these early albums. So half of the tracks on here are instrumentals. The opening track, Turn It On, does have vocals on, and the vocal responsibilities were between Mark King and Mike Lindup. Mike Lindup often did falsetto, and it really bounces quite nicely with Mark King's vocals. And again, they use all these riffs and different sections to keep developing the ideas and keep them going forwards, which is what I really like, and that's what you find with all of these tracks. 43 is one of my favourites. I don't say this much. I've said it once before and I'll say it again. There's some music out there that makes me sort of tear up, and that one is one of them, and I don't know what it is, but it's just so good. You really get into it. It's just got such a vibe about it. Both Turn It On and 43 are very high energy, and it just really sets the tone for the band. But then going into Why Are You Leaving, which again has got vocals in it, it changes into more of slow, smooth jazz, and it's such contrast from the previous two, but it works beautifully. And there's just some lovely chords in there, some lovely chord progressions. I love it. And then to finish off side A, we've got the upbeat Almost There. And it kind of reminds me, and a lot of the songs on the album kind of reminds me of Sonic the Hedgehog, weirdly enough. It's kind of got that vibe. This one kind of reminds me of the music from the special stage from the Sonic the Hedgehog 2. It's got that kind of upbeat vibe, it really does, and it wouldn't be out of place on that kind of video game. It's really got that energetic, upbeat kind of vibe to it that wouldn't sound out of place on Sonic. And again, I love the B section on it, where it just builds and builds and builds to these really nice bits, and there's breakdowns where it kind of comes down with all these nice sort of synth sounds. But what drives it the most is that bass guitar, which is just constantly the thumping away. It really is a key part to their sound, and it just ties it all together. It's the egg binder in the mix of all these songs. Then going into side 2, where it opens up on this sort of, and it's this really ongoing sort of driving instrumental. It's called Heathrow. I don't know if it's named after the airport, but it does remind you of maybe traffic or travelling, or it's constantly moving forward. And it's got a sort of almost worry about it. It goes like da 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 dun dun da dun dun da 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 da. And it does have that kind of worry to it, that kind of unease, which is quite a bold choice to open side B, but it works wonderfully, and it's just a really intriguing instrumental. Again, very bass driven, but there's some lovely synthesizer sounds they use in here. No, more so in Love Games, the next track, which is probably the most famous single from this album, and it's got to be my favourite track on the album. And it really brings together all these elements, the bass-driven guitar sound, those lovely synthesizer sounds. You've got these sort of arpeggio figures that fall, that add these sort of really nice, light elements to the mix. And then we have both vocalists singing here. We have Mike Lindup's falsetto vocals, and also Mike also mimics the synth solos in the middle, which is really interesting. You don't get a lot of bands who actually do that, but they didn't have to mimic those synthesizer moments in the instrumentals, but he does, and it works wonderfully. I think it's great. But I can't put it into words. It's just got such an energy and such a such a self-identity. They really knew what their sound was, even at this stage. it sounds so distinct. And then June Tune is quite varied. It starts off quite ominous. It comes in with this sort of low kind of synth sound, and it builds up into this riff, which builds, and then they've got vocalists again mimicking it. And then there's this B section, which is a bit more lighter, but it again adds something different to this album. And then the last song on this album is Star Child, and the lyrics on this, it's my favorite, probably my favorite lyrics on this album. It talks about being a child in space and being aware of all of space out there and kind of wanting to go into space. It's a really, really sort of vivid evocation of space and the stars and planets. And that's reflected in the kind of synths they use in this song, with those kind of rising figures in the synths, and it's sort of kind of evocative of exploration and wonder, and I think it's a great way to finish the album. Oh, and I love it. It's just brilliant. So again, they did in the later albums like World Machine, they did move away from doing these kind of doing instrumentals or focusing more on more pop based songs. But personally, I think this is my favourite. I like this one. Out of the Level 42 albums I've heard, this is my favourite. So there, thank you very much for listening to today's album review. And this was also in memory of Boone Gold, one of the members who appears on this album, who unfortunately passed away a few months ago. So this is in memory of him. Next week, I will be looking at this album. Ooh, look at this. Doesn't this look interesting? It is ABBA, The Visitors. Now, you may think you know ABBA, but I can probably guarantee it, you mightn't know some of the songs on this album. This was their final album. So from the same year as this, so this was their debut. This was their final album. And it's very interesting. So I'll be dissecting into this next week. So all the best for this coming week, everyone. And I will see you same time, same place next week. And I hope it's filled with everything you want it to be. Have a piece of cake and enjoy it in the meantime. Bye, everyone. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel if you enjoyed this review. And why not check out some of my other videos too?